Welcome back. In this section, we are going to make the transition from looking at the lymphatic system, what it encompasses and what the cells are and where they're located, to actually putting them to work and learning what that word immunity really entails. So, before I get along that pathway, there's just a couple of terms I want to make sure you understand. The first one we've already had long time ago when we talked about autolysis, and that was the word autophagy, where what happens is if a cell has damaged components, then those components can be engulfed and lysosomal enzymes will fuse with them and will destroy them, and then the cell can replace them with new ones. So autophagy is not the same thing as autolysis. But a big term to understand is the term cytokines. Now, you may have heard cytokine storm with the COVID-19 disease. And cytokines basically are proteins that are secreted by all kinds of immune cells. And they're very important. They cannot cross the plasma membrane to get into other cells, but they each have specific cells and they bind to receptors on those cells. And then once they have bound to the receptors on those other cells, what we call the target cells, they will have genes that are either activated or deactivated. Something is going to happen, and that second cell then creates a biological effect. Now, that effect can be on that cell that it bound to, what's called an autocrine reaction, or it could just be on nearby cells, or the effect could be on distant cells. So the cell that it's binding to does not necessarily say this is where it's going to happen. And there are a lot of different kinds of cytokines, and some of these we will definitely talk about as we continue through the immune system. These include things such as interferons, interleukins, growth factors, colony stimulating factors, tumor necrosis factors, and other assorted chemotactic factors. And about this time, you're kind of going, okay, what does that word chemotactic mean? Okay. So chemotaxis is another term you need to understand. And what this means is the movement of either a cell or an organism in response to a chemical signal. So usually what we mean is like here, it's like putting out the cookie breadcrumbs for your dog to follow, okay? But technically chemotaxis can be towards or can be away. So it can be attractant or it can be repellent. But unless we specify that this is a repellent, we're usually almost always considering that it's an effect of chemoattraction. Okay, so let's get started. What is immunity? Well, immunity is the body's ability to resist disease, or if there is disease, to combat that disease. And it's multifactorial. It's not a simple process. And we can have different types of immunity, and we have different levels of immunity. So when we're talking about types of immunity, I want you to realize preventing disease means this is happening when you're healthy, and combating disease means this is happening when you're not so healthy, okay? But that's not the two types of immunity. Both types of immunity work when you're healthy as well as when you're sick. So the first type of immunity is non-specific, which is also known as innate immunity. It's called innate because this means you were born with this type of immunity. It is an immediate type of immunity to something that is foreign, but it's not specific against any one thing. It's just this generalized protection against this wide range of things. Like, for instance, putting on a heavy winter coat will protect you from sunburn. Not that you probably wear a coat for sunburn. Protect you from winter winds. It can protect you somewhat from a rain if it's light enough. So it's very non-specific. And the thing about non-specific or innate immunity is it doesn't matter how many times you have invoked this before, you're going to invoke it your entire life, and the response is going to be exactly the same no matter what it is. So if you have the measles germs, you're going to have this response. If you have the mumps, you're going to have the same response. If you have Ebola, you're going to have the same response. That's what non-specific means. Now, in contrast to non-specific, you can guess that the other type would be called specific, but it also has two other synonyms. Acquired, because you're not born with it, and adaptive, because it changes from the initial non-specific forms. So this type of immunity only develops in response to a specific pathogen, and it's only specific for that one pathogen. So if it's anti-coronavirus causing COVID-19, it doesn't care about any other coronavirus. It doesn't care about the polio virus, about Ebola, about measles, about syphilis. It doesn't care about anything else. And this is adaptive. What that means is if you have created specific immunity against this, say for instance, against polio, then the second time you're exposed to that polio antigen, you will have a faster and stronger response. So we'll see how that happens later on. All right, now that you understand the two types of immunity, let's get started with the various lines of defenses. So there are 3 different levels of defenses, and we are going to only talk about the first level in the remainder of this video. The whole point of the first line of defense is to keep it out of your body. Okay, if whatever that pathogen is inside your body, that means there was a failure of your first line of defense. So all of your first lines of defenses are non-specific, and they all fall in that general category of barriers to entry. So these could be physical barriers, the wall, okay? So skin, mucous membranes inside your oral cavity, your vagina, your anus, your nasal cavities, cilia, moving stuff back out. Or it could be chemical barriers, and the chemical barriers can be on the physical barriers, okay? So the oil from your sebaceous glands, your sweat glands, your saliva glands, urine washing bacteria out of the urinary tract, tears, any kind of secretion. So like your gastric secretions with the really acidic pH, in case there were germs on that chocolate chip cookie, your gastric secretions are going to try to kill those germs before those germs can enter into your tissues. And the third type of barrier to entry that people rarely think about is that we have resident bacteria in our body. We have a normal flora, and the whole point of this normal flora is to keep out the bad germs. Okay? So the classic example of this is, ladies, you have normal flora in your vagina, and certain antibiotics that you're taking to treat infections can kill that normal flora, and that lets other organisms proliferate. And the classic example is if you have certain bacterial infections, we give you certain antibiotics, then about 90% of women with this antibiotic will end up with a yeast infection in the vagina because that normal flora has been wiped out. Okay, that doesn't happen with every antibiotics. Okay, so don't think, oh, I'm not going to take my antibiotic for my strep throat in case I get a yeast infection. Now, the yeast infection is much easier to treat. All right, and with that, we are done with our first line of defense, and I will see you in our next video when we talk about our second line of defense. Thank you for all your work.